So I thought I'd touch on two things. I mean, one is on Catholic AI, which is what we're working on. And the other thing I want to talk about is just what we see is the future, and why we think the church's voice is particularly important. So let me start with Catholic AI. So why do we get into Catholic AI? Why do this? I remember when I was in seminary, I converted to Catholicism from Anglicanism, and I remember I picked up, someone gave me Catholicism for Dummies, and I remember at the time that was a big help to me. I'm sure many of you have probably experienced this as well. You know, studying Catholicism is kind of like falling into a rabbit's hole, right? There's just more and more. You can go deeper and deeper and deeper, and sometimes you can feel like you don't even know where to branch off to. And so I felt that book was very helpful. And later on, need this? Oh, sure. Is that better? Good? Okay. Later on, when I started working for the Archdiocese, it was mentioned that I worked in the Office of Spiritual Affairs. And the office did many things, but one of the things that I had to do in the office was take calls from people who had questions about the faith or had a complaint about something. And I was shocked in that office, the breadth of the questions people asked. And it kept us on our toes. I mean, we found ourselves having to go back to the original text and look up answers all the time. It's incredible. We call it in the industry something called the long tail, which is the possible questions people go ask. And the Catechism covers off some of the essential ones, but there's just so many that just aren't covered. And so, anyways, when I was working there, one of the things that occurred to me is, you know, a lot of this is just trying to map people's questions to the kind of original source documents. And if we had some kind of way to leverage technology to do this better, we'd probably be able to serve a lot more people. Because obviously our office and the average priest only has so much time in their day. So, you know, later on, when we started working in technology, particularly when we were working with Google in Rome, artificial intelligence was a field that we were following. We didn't really see any practical applications immediately until ChatGPT dropped. And we learned that a bunch of Catholics were using it. They were asking it philosophical and theological questions. And it's a great piece of technology, but it has its downsides, as was mentioned, its propensity to hallucinate. You know, it's very eager to please, so it makes things up from time to time. And of course, everything it generates is not grounded in the sense it doesn't give you citations to let you know where its generated outputs are coming from. You'll start to see that a little bit more and more. It'll go and crawl the web and give you sources, but those aren't always from original source documents. So the Catholic AI project was more of a research project with us to figure out, can we mitigate the downsides of this technology so that it can be useful for something like Catholic AI? So that research project, it took us about 6-7 months to develop the initial product called Magisterium AI, and we deployed it in, I think it was July of 2023. The idea was to get diocesan theologians, philosophers, and canon lawyers from around the world to test it and then work out the kinks. And then I foolishly did an interview with EWTN when it broke. They found out about it, and then we were shocked. It went viral, and we had so much traffic it crashed us, and we actually had to go to Sam Altman and OpenAI for help to get the site back up. So to us, that was a very strong signal that there's something here, and we should focus more on it. And so the company pivoted to solely focusing on building and scaling Catholic AI, which became the mission of the company. There's now a couple of particular challenges that we found in doing this, and the work is nowhere near complete. One was that long tail I mentioned. We initially, when we built it, thought people would be coming there to ask, basic doctrinal questions and things like that. But what we found was the questions people were asking were something very complex, which required the AI to kind of generalize from basically the documents it has access to someone's particular situation. And this caused a bit of a panic at the company because this wasn't something we envisioned. We weren't sure how well it would work. So one of the techniques we had to develop in order to mitigate this was to find ways to expand the knowledge base, so that the breadth of knowledge that the AI had access to. Initially, when we launched, I think we had 600 magisterial documents, so the catechisms, the compendiums, and so on, the Code of Canon Law. That wasn't nearly sufficient. And so we started this massive digitization project, which was basically trying to get our hands on the breadth of the Catholic Church that haven't been digitized, so we could give it to the AI, so when someone asks a question, the AI could go and check and hopefully find some kind of document that could guide it in answering. And this was very successful. I think that to date, there's over 26,000 documents it's currently referencing right now, but still insufficient. And this kind of leads us to why we developed a product called Vulgate AI. It was created because some of the pontifical universities in Rome, which have some of the rarest libraries in the world, their libraries are exceptional, but in order for people to access them, they had to travel to Rome. And so one institute in particular, the Pontifical Oriental Institute, which serves Eastern churches, so Middle East, East Africa, Eastern Europe. This constituent in particular had difficulties with access to the library. So the rector, who's a Jesuit named Father David Nazar, came to us and said, Matthew, is there some way that we could democratize access to this library somehow? And he said, ideally what I'd like is for anyone in the world to be able to access it in any language on any device. And so that was an enormous challenge. But when we studied the problem, we realized AI could be actually an incredible solution to this problem. And so we built Vulgate to essentially serve two purposes. One is to help speed up and scale the digitization of the church's knowledge. So basically go into those libraries and pull those books off the shelves that have been open 100 years. May have something very important to say, but nobody's reading them. So that was the first step. How do we ensure that we can speed up and scale this digitization process? So Vulgate extracts the information, cleans it, structures it, and then converts it into something called vector embeddings, which is a way of abstracting away from the text to the meaning of the words. And this particular technique of vectorization of libraries means that anyone in any language can actually extract insights from these libraries in their own language. And we saw this as an enormous opportunity, not just to democratize access to the patrimony of the church, but also to serve research. So this has been a very exciting development. We still have a lot more work to do. We're standing something up in Rome called the Alexandria Digitization Hub. This is actually where we're getting a bunch of robotic scanners. It's pretty cool. These robots turn the pages and they scan the pages. And we're buying a bunch of these to help speed up the physical ingest. And then basically Vulgate takes the information from the books that's been scanned, it extracts it, and it converts it to vector embeddings, and then we democratize access to it through the Vulgate system, and then eventually through Magisterium AI to hopefully everyone in the world for free. So anyways, this Catholic AI project, there's still a lot more work to do. I could go on and on and on about all the technical challenges that exist, but one thing I'll just say in conclusion on this particular segment is, there's this tired kind of saying, but meeting people where they're at. And what we found is that there's a lot of people out there who aren't ready to step into a church and talk to a priest or share their concerns. But they are ready to test their problem, their query out on a chatbot. And so really for us, this isn't a question of, trying to replace the priest, not at all, or the catechist or anything like this. This is just simply recognizing where people are at, and that really they have two choices. They can go to a secular LLM like Gemini or ChatGPT with their theological and philosophical questions, or we can offer them an alternative where fidelity is kind of the objective function. And so we've got lots of testimonials of people who have started a journey to the church, others who actually had some misconceptions of the church clarified. And so it's been kind of a beautiful project, although again, there's still a lot more work to do. And then and finally, I just want to touch briefly about AI and why I think the church's voice is important in particular, especially as someone working in the industry on product and on technical issues. So we just finished training the world's first Catholic language model called Ephraim, and that was enormously challenging. And it'll be a while before we release that to the public. There's obviously immense potential with AI, and I acknowledge what Jen said, that AI in robotics is likely to disrupt large swaths of the labor market. And I think this is actually underhyped and underestimated. I think typically the people that speak to these things are from AI labs, and I think there's a lot of great people running the AI labs, but they have shareholders, and so they have to be a little bit careful with what they say. And frankly, I just don't think it's enough of a political issue right now because, politicians and things tend to think in 4-year cycles. This isn't a big issue as it will be in 4 years' time. But I think at the end of, say, the Trump administration, I think it's going to start to become a major issue. And so I'm concerned that the actual disruption is far greater than we can possibly imagine. I mean, I don't think there'll be really a field that won't be immensely touched by this. I mean, some people say 50%. I mean, I think it's probably more 75, 80%. When we get there, I don't know. But I think it's going to be very difficult for any industry, right, to just say, we're going to choose a human instead of that robot that we can pay, pennies, which is basically just the energy that requires to run it, and it can work 24 hours a day without any benefits or anything like that. I just think that the nature of capitalism is going to force basically virtually any company to have to pivot over to AIs. Now, it doesn't mean that every industry is going to be disrupted the same way, but I think every industry will be touched by it. And because of this, what I'm concerned about is that there isn't a robust civil conversation happening about this technology's implications, the true implications that they're going to be. There isn't a broad enough conversation happening about it now. And so I worry that what will happen is these changes are going to arrive, we're not going to be prepared, and because of that, there could be a lot of fallout as a result. One of the particular issues I'm worried about, and it's been kind of hinted at, and I'm sure some of you have seen the headlines about people kind of falling in love with these virtual bots and things like that. When people all of a sudden don't have a job to check into, right? What we worry about is that some people are going to start questioning what their value is, right? I mean, now what do? I got all this time on my hands. I'm not even sure what I'm good at. I mean, I took the job because it paid me and allowed me to feed my kids, but now I don't have to show up for the job. I don't really know what I'm supposed to do with my life. Apparently, the economy doesn't need me anymore, so what do I do? And I worry a lot of people will just turn to virtual worlds, right? Virtual reality and things like that. And I worry that they'll head for an existential cliff, because eventually they're going to realize that's not ultimately satisfying. Then what happens? And this is where I think the church has a very important role. You know, the church has shepherded humanity through several of these civilizational changes, and I think human intellectual and spiritual formations can be more important than it ever has been before. Because I don't think humanity's ever kind of faced this challenge where, you know, we're competing with machines which can, you know, reason more effectively than us, at least small r reason, and can do things, you know, cheaper than us. And so, the particular role I see for the church, and why I'm glad that the Pope is prioritizing this issue, is helping to prepare humanity for these changes. And then when people are having these feelings of, you know, I don't know what my worth is, they start questioning their dignity, the church can be there to help lead them, to remind them that there's more to life than just working. And that work can be understood in many different ways. You know, I tend to agree with Elon that I think we are headed toward an era of superabundance, and I think that's very exciting. Goods and services will be very, very cheap. And so maybe everyone's Maslow needs, you know, shelter and food will all be taken care of. But we have to make sure that existentially people know how to live. And that way they recognize there's more to life than just punching in and punching out, that investing in your friendships, in your marriage, like in your children, finding ways to serve in your community. We'll have lots of time for things like that, and I think that's a beautiful thing. So I don't think we should be pessimistic. I think these technologies can be major unlocks for us, and I think we can head towards a golden age, but it's going to take a lot of work, I think particularly from the church, to ensure that we're ready for this, and that everyone has the access to the human, intellectual, and spiritual formation needed to thrive in this new golden era.